Hi, I'm Steven Kapp Perry. I'm the host of In Good Faith, a podcast that comes from BYU Radio. We recently did a program that was all about gathering places for Native peoples here in the U.S., and I thought you would enjoy seeing some of the pictures that we took and the video at a place called Chaco Canyon. It's a national monument. It's a place where, starting about 800 AD, Native peoples in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area started building what turned out to be amazing structures, 4 stories high, acres with hundreds and hundreds of kivas, the round ceremonial rooms, hundreds of them. And then, of course, there's the mystery of Chaco Canyon, which is why everybody left and why they're not there now. Nathan Hadfield has been over this state park for years and years. He knows it well, and he was part of this program we did for our podcast. Take a listen as he talks about some of the ceremonial purposes and what they've discovered about Chaco Canyon. Enjoy. Do we know about what part of time, what length of time it was used as a ceremonial or trade center?
Well, we know that Pueblo Bonito, which is the largest building in the canyon, construction began on that structure around 850 AD. Now, there were people living in the area before then, but with Pueblo Bonito, that was the first time they were building these monumental structures. And by about 1000, 1100, Bonito was not the only one of these monumental structures in the canyon. You had about a half dozen right in the canyon itself, and then on the mesas surrounding the canyon, you had other monumental multi-story structures. So the heyday, or the peak of this civilization in Chaco Canyon was probably around 1050, 1100, 1150, right around there.
Sometimes we'll see pictures of ruins from Native American history, and they'll be in a little cliffside. There'll be a little one-story storage room and maybe a cooking area. But this is nothing like that. This is out in the open, as you mentioned, stories high, wide as a football field. What were the purposes, do we think, for building that and people coming together there?
Well, it's my belief, and others share this as well, that their culture was at a point in its lifespan when they had the ability to create monuments to themselves. And, you know, we have monuments in America today that recognize our leaders and our accomplishments. And that's what I think they were doing in Chaco, building these grand, ostentatious, over-the-top monuments. And Chaco Canyon became a destination where people might come from 40, 50, 60 miles away or more to visit these monumental structures. And we know that trade was happening. We know people were bringing things into the canyon from great distances. It's quite likely that people were coming to not just exchange material goods, but exchange ideas and knowledge. We know that in Chaco Canyon, they were very knowledgeable about astronomy, and they even had features, architectural features in their buildings that were aligned with astronomical events. So astronomy and architecture and turquoise design and ceramics were all things that were a big part of this culture that were being learned about and exchanged in Chaco Canyon.
I was there not too long ago, And I expected to see some kivas, those round rooms that you described, that you would they'd be covered and you'd enter from the top. But it's not just that there were a bunch of them, it's that there were hundreds of them in the different cities or structures around there. Do we have any idea why they needed so many of them and what those ceremonies were like in those round rooms?
Well, we know that they had a fire pit. And so there probably would have been a fire burning within that pit during the duration of these ceremonies. Some of the kivas have, it looks like a floor vault. And I've been told that it's quite possible that they would have stretched planks of wood over those openings, over those vaults. And during certain ceremonies, individuals might dance on the wooden planks to create a rhythmic or drum-like effect. So if you're sitting in those rooms during a ceremony, you're, smelling the smoke, and you're probably hearing the rhythmic pounding on those wooden planks. You're probably hearing drums or singing. A lot of the ceremonies involved the use of copper bells that were brought in from great distances. So you're going to have this sensory overload of music and, like I mentioned, the smoke that is generated by that fire throughout the ceremony. It's probably quite warm in there, especially during the summer months with the fire going. It's probably a uncomfortably warm place. We have so many of these throughout the canyon because, like we were just talking about, we believe that Chaco was a spiritual center for the ancestral Pueblo people. And we know that kivas were very important spiritual places. And so it's quite possible that anyone who came to Chaco Canyon, it's very likely that they attended some type of ceremony within a kiva. And, with a fairly large population in the Four Corners area, the ancestral people, if a lot of them were coming to Chaco Canyon for a special purpose during a special time of the year, then I'm sure almost every kiva was occupied.
Thank you for teaching us that. I'm wondering, for context, what was happening in the rest of the world, in Europe, for instance, at the same time that these sites were being constructed and used?
Well, I saw that in the email that you sent before the conversation, and I went ahead and did some internet research, and one thing that was happening quite a bit in the 1100s in Europe, in Spain, and in France and other modern European countries, was the construction of some of the cathedrals, some of the massive cathedrals that dot the landscape in Europe were being built around the same time. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in France was construction began on that building around the same time that things were really flourishing in Chaco Canyon. And so you see those parallels. These are, again, massive, monumental buildings. These cultures had gotten to a place where, you're not building stuff like that if you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from.
So a sign of civilization or people working together.
Yeah, they reached a point in their civilization where they were able to really do some artistic and things that were above and beyond what a culture could do if they were struggling with day-to-day survival. So we know that was happening in Europe, and some of the Crusades were happening as well. So I think that's those are events that people are familiar with, and those were happening around the same time that Chaco Canyon was flourishing.
You've been involved, you said, for over 20 years, and I wonder what has impressed you or what have you learned in that time that you didn't know at the very beginning that has been discovered since?
It surprises me that a lot of Americans, don't know about this place. I mean, there's certain places in our country that I think almost every American is familiar with. Like if you think of the Alamo, I think people across the country know the Alamo. And you could make a case that Chaco is much more significant than the Alamo. Not to belittle that story at all, but when you look at what happened here over the course of centuries, and just the architecture alone, the monumental structures, so many of them in a very condensed area. I mean, this is on par with some of the most iconic ancient sites around the world. I mean, you think of places like Machu Picchu or places along those lines. Everyone, or lots of people are familiar with a place like Machu Picchu, but I don't think a lot of folks know Chaco like they do these other places. And once you experience the place and once you begin to learn more about it, I think a lot of people ask themselves those same questions. Why isn't this place more well-known? Why aren't, more and more people coming here each year? So that's been something that I've, asked myself since I've lived and worked at these places, for sure.